All right, and we are live with the first live stream on the channel. I wanted to talk about solo travel. That's the title of this particular live stream. We'll save this in podcast format as well for you. But the purpose of the channel that I started was to document some of my solo travel, which I started doing about 6 years ago, and to kind of inspire people to maybe try solo travel themselves. So I wanted to create these live streams to go into more depth into some of the reels that I create. So you notice on the YouTube channel or on the on my Instagram channel, I generally try to keep my reels to about a minute, and the shorts on the YouTube channel for about a minute. We'll look at that and continue to expand it maybe later. But for now, I wanted to take the time on these live broadcasts to expand on some of those shorts and some of those reels. So that's what we'll do over the next couple of weeks. We'll take a look at a particular area, let's say like Osaka, for instance. I threw a few highlights in a 1-minute video. I'll expand on that. I'll talk about how I got down to Osaka, what that was like, how to get the train ticket, how to actually purchase an airline ticket for a reasonable price, try to find an upgrade, things like that. So that's going to be the purpose of this channel, because I've noticed there's vlogs that sort of, they have the budget niche vlogs. And then there's these other vlogs where people are staying in these crazy rooms overlooking mountaintops. It's just stuff that's very unrealistic for, I think, most of us to do. And being that I'm not in my 20s anymore, so sometimes that budget lifestyle and staying in hostels is not ideal. But also, I want to look for a good bargain, and most of the time, to be honest with you, when you find these sort of middle of the road places or places that even locals would stay at, they're better because, again, it's where locals stay, and it's where there's less tourist activity. Sometimes you have to go into those tourist areas, but for the most part, you want to try to avoid some of those, because if you want to see the authentic part of a city, a country, or whatever, you really got to get in where the local people are and rub shoulders with them and have a drink, etc. So I think on this first one, we'll just talk about solo travel. Pros and cons. Let's start out with some pros. Well, let's start out with talking that like solo travel is different than traveling with a buddy or traveling with a group. We'll talk about why I think it's better and why I enjoy it so much. But if you are thinking about doing that, then there's some questions you should probably ask yourself around, do I enjoy being by myself, or am I the kind of person that always has to have people around? If you're not sure, then one thing you can do is ask yourself, like, when was the last time you actually did something by yourself? Something like going to a movie, something like going into a restaurant by yourself and having a meal. I didn't do a lot of that when I was younger. And when I first started to do it, it felt a bit awkward. Just going into a bar by myself and sitting down and, just having a drink and feeling like everyone's looking at me, or when I'm eating a meal by myself, having these dumb thoughts that, well, everyone's looking at this guy sitting there by himself. The truth of the matter is no one really cares what you're doing. We think about ourselves more often than anyone else does. And so logically, then everyone else in the space, wherever it is, whether it's a restaurant or bar, is more likely thinking about themselves than you. So if you're thinking about solo travel, I would start there. Try to do something around your town. Try to go out and stretch yourself a little bit. To go out and really eating alone is like one of the kind of interesting things. There are certain areas of the world that I've been to where eating by yourself is not like a big deal. Like in Japan, for sure. Cruising into spots, even some spots like in Korea were conducive to eating solo. But one of the struggles that I did have in Korea is that so many of the meals are like these stews, or if you're thinking about something like a Korean barbecue, where we've got, just a number of people sitting around that barbecue cooking meats. Difficult to go there by yourself because number one, the owners of the restaurants don't want you in there alone because you're taking up a whole table that would normally seat up to 6 or 8 people, right? And then two, that type of environment is really meant to be shared. So what you need to do there is probably try to go make a friend before you do that. But so I would encourage you, if you've never gone on a trip by yourself, um, you should start small, go out and do something alone, go watch a movie by yourself, and then maybe take like a weekend trip somewhere, somewhere close to where you can sort of figure out if like, hey, I don't, having this time to myself feels kind of weird, or it's not really my cup of tea. But when I go over some of the pros of traveling solo with you, then you may rethink what it means to travel by yourself. I mean, I get asked a lot by people, when I tell them, well, I was just traveling for a month, or I went here, I went there. And they're like, who would you go with? Like, that's always seems to be the first question, right? Who did you go with? Well, I went by myself. They're like, wow. It always seems like it's an amazing thing to travel by yourself. And maybe it is a little bit out of the norm. But once I did it a few times, I was completely hooked, and I am completely hooked on traveling solo. I certainly don't mind meeting people, meeting friends. I've done that when I've been out, and I also like going on trips with other people. But as I'll talk about in the next few minutes, some of the pros of traveling by yourself, they're kind of unbeatable, to be honest. And I think the first pro that we can talk about is you are the master of your domain. Wherever you want to go, whatever you want to plan beforehand, it's all up to you. There's no one to bounce it off of. There's no compromise that has to be made. Whenever you're traveling with somebody else, there is inevitably some sort of compromises that you have to make between each other. And that's normal, right? What time do we want to eat? What time are we getting up? Are we going to this next city? And when you're traveling solo, you get to make all those decisions yourself. For instance, when I was traveling through Asia, I had kind of a rough outline of the cities and countries that I wanted to visit, but I had the freedom to change that and did change it. Midstream, a couple weeks in, I was supposed to travel over to Thailand. And the weather there was just absolutely miserable. It was 90 plus degrees and like 90% chance of rain. Well, I'm a Seattle boy. I didn't need any more rain in my life. And while the temperature seemed fun, trying to explore a city in the torrential downpour, not my idea of a great time. And I had so much fun in Japan, my first like 8 or 9 days in Asia, that I didn't mind taking those days back, shifting my schedule, going to Hong Kong and going to Taiwan, and then coming back to Japan. But see, that's a flexibility that you have as a solo traveler. If I was traveling with somebody or with a group, for instance, maybe their whole purpose for the trip was to get to somewhere like Bangkok, right? And if you cancel that, well, you're just ruined their whole trip. So now you have to go to Bangkok even though you don't really want to. And see, that goes back to what I was talking about you kind of being the master of your own domain. Another big thing for me around that is like schedules, like sleeping, when you wake up, where you go in the mornings, what you plan. Like in places like Japan, I liked to be out really late. Some of those really fun areas in Shinjuku, fun areas like Golden Gai or Memory Lane, also known as Alley. I'll censor these things for the first 10 minutes or so. You will stay out in those places until 2, 3. They stay open until 5 a.m. First of all, so that's something that I never covered in a lot of those reels. Is that it doesn't even. I would go over there at 10 or 10:30, and it's still not even like really warming up. Like the kind of some of the places are empty. There's not really a lot of people in there, which is if that's what you're looking for, that's a good time to go. Right, hit it a little earlier. But if you're looking for the craziness and the fun, yeah, people don't start shuffling in there till 11, 12 o'clock. And the weather didn't matter. It rained, it didn't rain. People, locals and tourists alike, love that area. So yeah, then if I wake up in the morning and, I don't want to get up at 8 a.m. and go have the buffet breakfast or whatever's happening downstairs. So, you can just make that decision. Hey, I'm going to sleep in tomorrow, or, I didn't have anything planned. So that was one of the reasons that I would stay out later, like Golden Guy or somewhere in like Hongdae in Seoul, knowing that I didn't have anything planned in the morning. Those would be the nights when I would try to stay out late and meet some people. And again, like I said, making changes to the itinerary. A big one for me is food and eating. I tend to not eat that much, or not as much as some other people. Some people are totally, I'm into the food all the way, and I got to have 3 solids and I got to have snacks in between every one of those. Um, I'm not really like that. So it's not great to travel with me from that perspective, because I'll just skip breakfast. And then if I have a couple of coffees or something, it's entirely possible that I will skip lunch as well. And at some point in the afternoon, I'll be like, man, why am I so tired? Oh, it's because you forgot to eat today. And to some people, the mere notion that you forgot to eat, it doesn't make any sense. But there are people like me, and it's certainly happened to me a bunch of times. So, that can be tricky for folks. I know when I've traveled with people, I say, well, what are we doing for lunch? It's like, I'm not really hungry. And then they're like, well, come on, man, we got to go, try this and that. And, I'll tag along and like hardly eat anything. And then I also kind of felt guilty, like I'm ruining their meal, because they're like, you're not even eating. And man, I told you I wasn't hungry. But if you're traveling solo, it's all up to you. If you just want to eat at the 7-Eleven, which I did many times, and we got to have a whole episode on the Combi, like the Lawson, the 7-Elevens, these places in Asia. I mean, even in Taiwan, they were outstanding places to just grab a decent meal for a reasonable price. They're nothing like the 7-Eleven convenience stores in the US. I mean, you could pay your mortgage at these things, do banking. They're wild. All right, but that's another live stream. It's another podcast. Another pro. Let's go down this list that I put together here. Another pro of traveling solo is that accommodations, particularly when I was in Asia, sometimes in Europe too, they charge not just by the room, but by the person. So what that means for you is that you can actually have cheaper accommodations being a solo traveler for the same room, same type of room, than for someone who is, traveling in a group of 2 or 3 or 4 folks. And then along those same lines, being a solo traveler, it's easier to get into certain restaurants, venues, events, or sites, because number one, you're only looking for one ticket. And in places like, where did I go? Disney Sea in Tokyo, you'll often get to cut the line for rides and stuff. So like I wasn't waiting as long to enjoy some of the rides at Disney Sea, because a group of 3 people would come up and then they would ask, does anybody want, actually they put the number behind their hand like this, or in front of their hand. So when they first started doing that, I didn't know what they were saying. They're going like this. And I was like, I don't know. I'm doing the American way. But this is, I think, more polite maybe. But anyway, being solo, you get into things easier. When I went to that Michelin star noodle joint, what is the name of it? It was in Myeongdong. I'll do a whole episode on that too, because I don't even think I posted. I might have put something like in one of my stories about it and said, like, hey, I just had these amazing noodles. But I got to talk more about that, because that was like $7.50 US. Michelin rated for like the last 7 or 8 years, been open since like 1966. But again, I'm getting ahead of stuff. There's so much more that I want to tell you about. And that's why when I was trying to figure out like, well, how do I communicate these things? This seemed like the best format for it. And then, eventually you could ask me some questions about things and I can respond to those those questions. But initially, I have this huge. I have like 6 years worth of traveling to get across to you, to help you in your journey to figure out if you want to do solo traveling, and then sharing like tips and tricks about how I traveled business class for like 60,000 airline miles, etc. How to do all of that through credit cards or loyalty programs and things like that. Again, I'll put whole episodes of that type of content as well, if that's something that people are interested in. Okay, so we went over cheaper accommodations, being the master of your domain. Oh, and I kind of, that was a nice little segue, I think, to this next pro that I listed, which is finding reward flights, like I was just talking about, is 100, maybe 200% easier because you only need to find one seat. Finding 2 reward seats is tough. Finding 4 is, you're booking a year out. But just grabbing one seat is pretty easy. And if you have a flexible time off schedule, or if you have to kind of plan your trip around those sort of dates for those award tickets that are cheaper, because they are a little bit few and far between, but they are available. They're out there. And, through a lot of trial and error of my own, I figured out how to find the best kind of deals, where to look for, where it's easier to search, which websites to use, and then transferring points from things like Chase Sapphire Reserve is the primary card that I use. And then I used a bunch of One World miles, a bunch of Alaska miles specifically. But I'll show you how to manipulate those and use those to book. I just booked British Airways first class flight from LHR from London to Seattle around Thanksgiving for 80,000 miles. I'll show you how I found that. And if that doesn't, you're like, well, whatever, who cares about that? That's literally a $15,000 flight that I got for 80,000 miles. We'll do the math on some of these in another live stream, but there's some unbelievable deals to get to and from Europe or to and from Asia. My last few times that I went to either place, I used points to book an award flight. And then there's also these cheap carriers now, like Zip Air goes to Tokyo for like $300 something in economy. So if you're looking for like the bare bones to just get over there, you can do that as well. And I've heard the seat pitch on that's pretty good. It's like 31 inches, so a little above the normal now, which is unrealistically hovering around like 28 inches. I don't understand what human beings that they are measuring to put into these seats. And actually, I don't even think they care. Maybe they don't. They just treat us like cattle, jam us into the back of the plane. So yeah, reward flights is easier. Reward nights, from things like Marriott or whatever I've been using, those don't matter as much stateside. But like I said, there are some places overseas where they charge per person. So if there's an extra person in the room, whether it's another adult or a kid, they'll charge you an additional few dollars. So that's kind of the idea of the channel, some of the pros of traveling solo. We'll get into more of those as we talk about the rest of my trips, because I'm sure some things will come up that I didn't think about for this particular video. But let's just talk about a couple of the cons. I mentioned one of them before, that there are certain areas, there's certain activities, and there are certain restaurants, particularly like I mentioned in Korea, where it's more of a group event. And I absolutely love Korean barbecue, but the idea of going to Korean barbecue by myself does not excite me, right? The whole idea of it is that, there's big plates of food, or things like hot pot too, even like you want to have a couple people there, so you're trying things. Not that I didn't absolutely destroy some shabu shabu a couple of times. Just real quickly, when I was in, what part of Tokyo was I in at that point? I think I was still staying in Shinjuku, and I went to a shabu shabu place, and I thought it was like a fixed menu, where you just get, a couple 100 grams of meat or whatever, and then dip it in there. But when I sat down, they started to explain it to me, and then I realized, oh, this is all you can eat, and it was all just these beautifully marbled Japanese beef cutlets. Oh, yeah, I've got some pictures and some video of that I haven't posted yet. That thing, oh man, my mouth is starting to water thinking about it. I think maybe because it's around lunchtime here in Las Vegas. So another one of the cons that I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about was does people will often ask me, like, does it get lonely when you're traveling by yourself? Do you get lonely? And the answer is, of course, yes. I think most humans, sometimes even when you're traveling in a group, somebody can attest to this, I'm sure, where you just don't feel like you're fitting in, so you're kind of with people but you feel lonely. When you're by yourself, when you're in another country, when no one else really speaks English there, that can get pretty lonely. It can get pretty tiring. I can tell you one quick story about when I was in, where was I? Barcelona. And I had been there for a number of weeks, just by myself. I think it was like 2 weeks. I speak Spanish, so I had been speaking Spanish, talking to people. I met some people, and then I heard an older couple in one of the pubs speaking English and talking about soccer, and I kind of aggressively, well, maybe it wasn't aggressive, but it was just, hey, like, oh, you're speaking English, like, where are you guys from? What are you guys doing? And I could tell that they were kind of like, all right, yeah, let's just slowly back away from this guy. So yeah, it does get lonely, but here's what you got to remember about feelings, right? We don't choose our feelings. They just happen. We choose how we react to feelings. So if you're feeling hungry, what do you do with that feeling? Well, you go and get something to eat. If you're thirsty, what do you do with that feeling? You get something to drink. If you're lonely, what do you do with that feeling? Well, you go and you find some people and you interact with people, or you go to a place. I will often try to find a restaurant, or maybe it's some kind of pub or bar where there's some energy there, and go in there and have a seat. And remember, my introverted friends, that having your phone out and being hunched over, this is not inviting energy. Meaning, I'm a pretty extroverted guy a lot of the times, so I will go talk to people in these places. I will try to speak their language. I'll try to introduce myself, etc. But if people are down in this, or that's the earbuds in and head down, like, that's pretty much a universal symbol to people of, like, leave me alone. So you have to be conscious of the energy that you're putting out when you go and sit down at these places, because if you want to talk to people, then you need to have an inviting sort of disposition. And that may be difficult for some of you, but it's something you can work on and something you can think about. I made some pretty cool friends along the way on the last trip. Excuse me. Just by being in an area. And honestly, one of the guys I met, who we ended up hanging out that night, and we still kind of converse over Instagram. I was just making jokes with the Google Translate app. I don't know how well these things were being translated, but he was laughing, and he happened to work as a coder. He was in, like, technology, like I am. So we kind of hit it off, and then he, invited me around and drugged me to a couple other spots where he said, hey, there's a lot of other English speakers here at these places. And then, lo and behold, yeah, I ran into another guy who gave me some great recommendations about where to eat in Osaka. And then also about where I was going next, which was Korea, telling me about a couple places to visit there, etc. So, yeah, there are certainly times, especially if you're gone as long as I was gone about 5 weeks. Being out of the country that long and not running into people, etc. I mean, one of the things that did happen was some folks reached out and FaceTime me. So that was always fun to see a familiar face and tell people how things are going. So you can do that. My point being, loneliness is a temporary thing. Everyone feels it. So, acknowledge it and then decide how you're going to overcome that, right? You're out enjoying yourself, having an amazing, amazing trip. Don't let a little bit of loneliness bum you out. The times where I felt it, especially too, was like when there's bad weather and it's not as conducive to exploring. It's pouring out, and those were the times where I would just kind of get up and walk around, or work on something to post as far as videos. Look back through my videos and see, oh yeah, here's all the fun stuff. Start planning the next thing, etc. So, I mean, those are a couple of the cons. Another con is that you don't really have anyone to help decipher or find your way. Like, navigation is completely up to you. So again, that's a pro, and then that's a con. Source of so many arguments, right, is navigation. Like, we're trying to get from A to B, or we're trying to get somewhere on time, and there's no one to blame if you don't read the train if you don't read the train schedule correctly, and you miss a train, or you're hiking through these subways, and I'm carrying all my stuff, and I'm trying to make sure that I get on this express train because I don't want it to take an hour and a half to get to the airport because my flight's in 2 hours. Yeah. So there's no one to say, does this look like the right way to go? So I just got really used to having no pride about not understanding where I was. I mean, you're a foreigner, so just act like a foreigner and just walk up to somebody like I did. Sumimasen, excuse me, like, I don't know where I'm going. Show the Google Translate app, which, by the way, is just a game changer. I spent hours on that thing with people who barely spoke any English, having a good time, laughing, making jokes, in both Korea and in Hong Kong, actually, and in Japan as well. So don't be afraid to break that thing out. And, while it is a con that there's no one there, there's nobody there to help you, you can figure it out. And like I said, don't be embarrassed to be like a foreigner, because you are. You don't know what you're doing there. Even if you've been there several times, something changes, or there was, especially when you're traveling through like the train system in Korea and Japan, and actually in Hong Kong as well, and a little bit in Taiwan, not as much, but often in English. So a lot of the signs, in Hangul, in the kanji, and then in English, and they'll even announce in English. So if that's something that you have sort of trepidation about, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I would recommend that you do learn some of the language, right? The simple stuff like excuse me, hello, goes a long way to making an effort. People appreciate it. I remember in France one time, and I think these lives are going to be filled with a lot of stories of me remembering things that happened. So enjoy or fast forward, it's up to you. But I was in France, and we're trying to get directions. And French is one of the Romantic languages, so it's structured similarly to Spanish. So it's just different vocabulary, so I could kind of figure it out. So I'm struggling through asking this guy which way to go and ordering a coffee. And then finally he spoke to me in English, and he's like, yeah, you need to go down here and do that. But oftentimes, and this is a gross generalization, but I've seen it happen to me, is particularly with the French. They will just pretend like they don't speak English. And it's complete bollocks because most of them do. Everywhere you go, it seems like someone speaks a little bit of English. So if they're, giving you the RBF, try a merci and give it a shot to speak to them in their native languages. Well, this will wrap it up. I will wrap it up by saying again, kind of the goal of this is to expand on, some of those really short posts that I've done, tell you more about those places, how I got there, what else I did when I was there, how to score some of these travel deals, where I stayed at this place. The place that I stayed at in Hong Kong, I got it for like 60,000 Marriott points. We got to talk about that. This room was unbelievable. It was a 5-star resort, 60,000 Marriott points. We'll go more into that later. But again, the channel's about not budget travel, not high-end travel, trying to find that sweet spot of travel. And then by, taking advantage of some of those things like airline miles, et cetera, you can drive down the cost, but still have a really cool experience of being able to fly in business class. Like, these are kind of once in a lifetime things that you have to try out, and points and miles are kind of the easiest way to do it. So, thanks for listening. Thank you for watching this. If this is helpful to you, give me a thumbs up, give me a comment, and let me know that this is the type of stuff you want to see. If you're being bored by my voice already at this point, 30 minutes in, please let me know that as well. And we can shorten these up. But I think 30 minutes is kind of what I'm shooting for. And then, depending on the topic and depending on if people want to ask questions, I can extend these out to more of like an hour format. But for now, I think I will say goodbye, good evening, and safe travels. See you soon.